Okay, good afternoon, comrades. Welcome to the third session of Communist University today. This session, two-person panel, the title is Socialist Alliance, Your Party, Green Party, Why History Keeps Repeating Itself. We've got two speakers, Marcus Strom from Australia, you didn't know him, and Tina Becker. I understand Marcus is going to start first, so yes. Off you go.
Thank you, comrades. I'm starting first because I'm going into the ancient history of, and Tina hopefully will update us at the end of. Our comrades just sent apologies that she can't be here. She'll be catching up later in the week, and because she didn't want to relive the trauma of the SLP, the Socialist Alliance, Respect all over again. But I'm glad you all want to. So I think a comment that someone made in the last session has retopped that in many ways what the manifestation of all these partyist projects have been is really been a crisis of coming from the crisis of social democracy itself, and which we may not have realised at the time, but is much more obvious now. And I'm glad to see Steve Freeman here, because I wrote this down, and it was a term he used at the time which I quite liked, which was the end of the Elizabethan social democratic consensus. It wasn't just the economic consensus, but also the beginning, that was overseen by the Elizabethan monarchist state, and beginning to crumble. And this also was at the time of the collapse of the bureaucratic socialism and communist parties. And again, building from what we were talking about in the last session, it has been a failure of the Marxist left in that sense. I'm not talking about us in this room. I think the whole of the Marxist left to really understand this period in that session and be able to re-establish a working class party around a coherent Marxist program. So it's a failure of program in that sense, based on, I think, opportunism and a misunderstanding of what the Marxist program actually is. So what I think we saw and what the Weekly Worker and the CPGB saw with the SLP and these other manifestations is the concretisation of the party question outside Labor. Now, 30 years ago was when the SLP was founded. I remember getting off the plane. I migrated to Britain at the time, and I turned up to the founding conference of the SLP down at Friend's house, I think it was. And I hadn't seen the CPGB comrades for a while, and I saw Mark Fisher and a few others, and I went, oh, and Mark's like, pretend you don't know me, because the witch hunt was already underway. I joined as a green skin, I suppose, and we started to do work. We joined the Socialist Labour Party to try and make it work. Before I go on for that, I mean, the party question, what is the concretisation of the party question? I think within class society, within capitalist class society, there is an impetus for the working class to form itself into a class through party forms. I think that happens through the nature of class struggle. I think ideologically, spontaneously, this is a reformist current. This is Labourism in a British or an Australian context. It's the bourgeois ideology within the workers' movement through the trade union consciousness establish itself as a party. But there's also the impetus to go beyond capitalism there, and this, I think, in the 20th century took the Communist Party form, to use a very broad generalisation. There were differences, and we can go into that if you want to. So not only did we have the crisis of social democracy in that Labourite form, with Blairism, New Labour, the abandonment of Clause 4. Of course, Clause 4 was forced, the Socialisation Pledge was forced on the Labour Party in 1918. I think it was Sidney Webb who drafted it. And that was kind of forced. It's similar in Australia. The Labour Party in Australia adopted a socialisation pledge, which it still has. but with the abandonment of Clause 4, and you had the echo, of course, the miners' strike. Scargill thought he won the miners' strike. I think he's the only one who does think he won the miners' strike. But it was the echo of that defeat, the defeat of syndicalism, the defeat of Labourite socialism, and the defeat of official communism, all coalescing at that time. And Scargill made a move in 1995, which led to the establishment of the party in 1996. It wasn't just a reformist party in that sense, because Scargillism wasn't just a reformist. So I think where the SLP ended up, where all these parties ended up, I think is an open question. We are not just armchair observers of these phenomena. We join and we participate and we try to fight for what is needed, which is an independent party based around a Marxist program. Of course, you couldn't predict. There were a lot of people who said, "Oh, it'll collapse. Scargill's a clown." Blah blah blah. And they can look back and say, "Well, we was right." But who could have predicted the Fourth International Supporters Caucus? Who could have predicted Harpal Bra becoming vice president? Who could have predicted rampaging Royston Bull becoming vice president of the SLP? In the second Congress in 1997, you had, there was a vote that was 135 votes to 82. Oh, it got up. And Scargill, or one of his minions, said, no, look again. Oh no, it was 135 to 3,082 against, because of the Cumbrian Retired Miners Association. So it was absolutely bizarre the way it turned out. But Scargillism, and it wasn't just reformism, Scargillism was a Labor Bonapartist or wannabe Labor dictator. I don't know if you remember when he had his Trotskyist minions beginning the witch hunt through the Fourth International Supporters Caucus, not expelling people initially. I was reading an article to defend Bob and defend Lee Rock and all these people. They were told that they were never members of the SLP because their form was void, and so these bureaucratic tricks. But Scargill said, "Oh, I'm against witch hunts." He tried to be above it, but of course he was behind it. But Scargillism was a mixture of that sort of Labor Bonapartism, syndicalism, Labourism, yes, but also official communism and British Road to Socialism. I remember at the first meeting of the Socialist Labour Party, which went on to become Socialist News, I was very nervous there because we reported on it. Dave Osler was there, and Scargill said, "Oh, I quite like that paper in Australia." He heard my accent. "You know, the one that's got the red map of Australia in the corner?" I said, "The Australian, Rupert Murdoch's flagship paper." He goes, "Yes, that looks, I want a red map of Britain on Socialist News." So that was kind of his strange politics. And there were all sorts of opportunisms. If you remember the International Bolshevik tendency claiming that they'd liquidated into the SLP. I reread one of Mark Fisher's columns, and he said, well, that was the cheapest price that they had to pay because no one knows or knew who you were. Your journal actually won a prize at the Timex Picket for the most obscure left-wing journal. So the SLP then started to ossify as a dead project. I think does it still exist? I think it's still kind of, I don't know.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. And at the same time, again, echoing out of the end of Clause 4, you had the Socialist Party in England and Wales, SPEW, having decided that the Labour Party was now a bourgeois party, beginning to work with to form socialist alliances under its hegemony. This took the form of the Scottish Socialist Party at its highest form, around nationalism. In England and Wales, when the SLP was clearly dying, a lot of people moved into the socialist alliances. And the ethos of that was unity on the 80% we agree with. That's the echo we kept. And but if you continue to exclude what we don't agree on, your political basis on which you agree or organise gets thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner. Because, I mean, I don't know about you, but I disagree with what I probably said in the last session if I thought about it half the time. So if we only organise around things we agree on, we're in trouble. So we have the 6 principal organisations. The SWP joined and gave it a bit of life. But as soon as they did, SPEW lost their argument for a federal party where they had a veto, and they walked out and they eventually formed TUSC, Trade Union Solidarity, whatever it's called, Socialist, whatever it's called. Coalition. Yeah. But remember, it was via CATP. The campaign against tube privatisation, which stood, I think it was Bob Crow at the time, he stood, anyway, CATP, SPEW, CATP and TUSC. And the SSP was, why was the SSP so vulnerable to becoming undone because of one personality, really, Tommy Sheridan? They created a personality cult around him, and then all the news came out that he allegedly, I'm saying that because I can't remember if it was proven in court or not, but allegedly is going to swingers clubs and all this bizarre, and it started to fall apart. At the time, you had John Rees theorising the united front of a special kind. And to his credit, at least I reread that yesterday, he said, no, the Labor Party is still he said it's a reformist party. He didn't use the term bourgeois workers' party, but he said it's still a party based on the working class, but we need a united front of a special kind. And this is very similar to what I would say people like Dave Osler and the Mandelites called the parties of recomposition, but of a different form, or I think I refer to them as parties of decomposition, because they are manifestations again of the decline of partyism, both communist partyism, Marx, but also the crisis of social democracy. And this is the second reference you get, Steve Freeman, and Steve had a similar sort of harebrained schema of a communist Labor Party, which again was just another halfway house to try and trap Labourites into a party where they can still be Labourites in that sense. I'll come briefly to why I think these people have this view. Then Iraq happened in 2003. Behind the backs of the Socialist Alliance, the SWP courted the Muslim Brotherhood and George Galloway, and they launched Respect. Now, there's nothing wrong with seeking a political expression of the anti-war movement. In fact, that's critical, because the movement itself, as massive as it was, didn't stop the war. So having a political expression for that was vital. But at what price? What price do these people pay? And we know this, Respect, I moved the motion at the Respect's founding conference to turn the R into Republic, which got voted down. And I remember it might have been Candy Udwin who got up and said that we'll scare away the monarchists. I went, yeah, we probably will. And I remember George Galloway coming up to me and saying, of course I'm a Republican Marxist, but we need a broad party. But they did the same thing on the Republic, MPs on workers' wage, immigration controls, secularism, a woman's right to choose. And so this was the price that the SWP was prepared to pay for this alliance, which was not a united front of a special kind, but was a popular front of a normal kind, I would think, in that sense. So what we see through there, and I'm from a distance, we've seen it again, is like, I'm not an expert on Pabloism, but this idea of using our secret Marxism source to control the levers of history. We get behind the great men of history. I think they're almost universally men. So Pablo in Algeria, and Fisk behind Scargill, John Rees behind George Galloway. You manipulate this, and of course, what we saw is that the king turns on the courtiers. The Labor bureaucrat uses them, throws them out, uses them, throws them out. And of course, I think SWP ran into its Comrade Delta crisis around the same time. So what is happening here? What is actually happening? So I think it's because the Marxist left in general has not resolved the question of program. That its program politics is, Marxism is for Sunday school speechifying. It's because their understanding of Marxism is what I would call Bolshevik reenactment society politics. It is irrelevant to today's politics. They think Marxism and Leninism is only relevant to a revolutionary situation. So the ALP left doesn't have one, but we wouldn't. It just has its vibe. We see this in Australia in the context of the establishment of the Socialist Party and the Victorian Socialists, the post-Cliffites they're sometimes referred to as group. They don't have the official IST franchise. They were called Greens on steroids as an insult, and they owned it, and they said, yes, we are. And I think this points to their movementism, that what they replace program with is the movement. The movement becomes everything, and we know that this is a recipe for opportunism. Central, again, to this, I think, is the transitional method, which I think is an opportunist charter. You can turn anything, defence of a bicycle lane, this is the first step in a chain towards state power. Defending childcare, defending funding to a childcare centre. Of course, we want to defend funding to a childcare centre, but in that theory, this is, and then you take people to the next step. It's this ladder towards socialist consciousness. While the Cliffites reject the transitional method, I think on paper, they had Tony Cliff's nose, and I think that is their method. It's the same method as far as I'm concerned. Of course, having a program is no guarantee that you're not going to be opportunistic, that you're not going to be sectarian, that you're not going to be a parliamentary cretin. That is why we need to combine it with open polemic, open debate, so we can judge not just leaders but local organisations according to these things. So the Marxist left's this secret Bolshevik reenactment society, so they know that their Marxism is not relevant to today, because their view of Marxism is there'll be a mass general strike, we'll form workers' councils, we'll arm the working class, but don't mention that yet, because it scares people away, and we'll abolish parliament, and we'll have Soviets and socialism. And I actually think that's what most Marxists think in the Marxist organisation. So because that is kind of crazy now and irrelevant to today's concrete situation, they don't talk about it. They hide their Marxist program away for when it will become relevant, when the working class spontaneously becomes revolutionary. So they become movementists. You hear, people aren't raising the Republic on the doorstep, certainly not raising the question of a popular militia. So, and they tail liberalism on constitutional issues. And they replace it all with hamster wheel politics. You just recruit people, put them on the hamster wheel. When they burn out, you've got a new lot, put them on the hamster wheel, and so on. So, our proposal to the Marxist left is that we should prioritise politics and democracy, that a minimum program is relevant to a non-revolutionary period. That is the basis of what we take to the working class, is our minimum program and our maximum program. We don't hide our maximum program, we don't pretend, and we take, and that has who controls the state? Who controls the constitution? How do we get the government, who and how is the government elected? Who controls the army? Who controls the courts, the bureaucracy? I think it was Roxy who said, that a ruling class considers all things in society as their purview, as relevant to them. And that's what we need to be fighting for. I think there's an echo in this in Tony Benn's 5 questions. What power have you got? Where did you get it? Whose interest do you exercise? And how or who are you accountable to? And how do we get rid of you? I think that they're reasonable questions to ask as well. They're class questions. They're the questions that a putative emerging ruling class should ask. So I think what we see and why this keeps happening again in these forms is that because the program of Marxists as they exist in society is that, well, our Marxism is actually a bit mad and we're not going to talk to you about it. But we've got this Greens on steroids, we've got, you know, things that you spontaneously come to us with. We agree with them, but we're going to fight for them harder than the Labor Party or that they will do, this hyperactivism. This is a combination, I think, of sectarianism and opportunism in one, and that's why you see the mad flip-flops of most of these groups. So from auto-labourism to auto-anti-labourism, there's nothing coherent about their approach to these questions. So that's why they try and create halfway houses where they can trap labourite workers into a pool that they can recruit. They can do two things: recruit to their secret Marxist program that they talk about on Sunday schools, and also try and turn really radical labourism into a mass phenomenon that will spontaneously cause a revolutionary situation sometime down the future where we can then reveal our true program. And I think that is the basis of why this keeps happening again, and why we need to keep fighting programmatically that our minimum program is relevant to today and our maximum program is relevant to people's aspirations of this kind of world people want to live in. I mean, if you talk to most people, they love a world where there's no stress about war and environment and housing and, you know, all these questions in our maximum program as well. And I will leave it there at nearly 25 minutes.
Perfect timing. Thank you, Marcus. Tina?
Into the modern times. And Marcus, you'll be surprised, we're still dealing with the same problems. Of course, you're not surprised. This is, I think, I'm trying not to repeat too much of what Marcus was saying. I think Mike called this the standard left project, which is still, you know, with us. You don't think your program is going to win over the working class, so you try to trick the working class, basically, by a halfway house, party of recomposition, a broad left organization, etc. They're all different, and yet they all have quite a lot in common. You know, the gay rights shibboleths of Lindsay German scandal. You know, if you have to reduce your program to the sort of absolute lowest common denominator, you do end up talking some absolute reactionary shite on occasion. But I think what they all have in common is that they've been set up by socialists who put something forward consciously they know it's not going to work. They know this is not going to achieve socialism. They know it's not going to organize the working class in a mass communist party, but they are generally, you know, they put this forward in the knowledge that their own program is not going to win it over. I think they're also putting it forward on the understanding that they probably don't trust the working class all that much. They don't get it. So we have to tell them like the minimum bits, because the working class they don't understand what communism is. They don't understand what we mean by, you know, replacing the police, replacing the army, which I think is a big problem. This is the class you claim, you know, supposed to run society, but they don't get that bigger program, so you have to fool them into joining those organizations. I do think that reflects quite a lot of a problematic attitude towards the working class. We should say, you know, we do get involved in these organizations. I think Marcus at the beginning, a little throwaway, just said, you know, we joined the SLP to make it work. Well, I now kind of know what you mean. We knew it wasn't going to work as a halfway house, so we joined it to transform it, isn't it? That's why we get involved in these organizations, not as, you know, we've been charged many times in your party, oh, you're just getting involved to increase the circulation of the weekly worker, to have a bigger pond to swim in, and, you know, that is good. You know, we have to test our policies, politics, etc. So it's a good way to, you know, of course, to talk to others, etc. But, you know, we're quite honest, we get engaged to transform them. We're engaging in them to transform them into the kind of party we actually need. We've done it in Labour, we've done it in Respect, we've done it in the Socialist Alliance, and we've done it in your party. Not to destroy it, again, what's also been claimed, but, well, sometimes it needs to be destroyed to be rebuilt, but, we've never set out to destroy any of those. We're exposing the problems with it, we're exposing the lack of democracy, and we're exposing the lack of a program, as Marcus has pointed out. The key issues, of course, is that these formations don't last, and that is the problem. They cannot be successful. The proof's in the pudding. They last a few months, they last a couple of years maybe. I think Left Unity still exists, even as some kind of rump corp somewhere, but they are not able to bring any significant amount of people on board, so it don't work. It might be worth quickly looking at some of, because we've been told, and I'm sure it'll come up again as well in this session this week, that look at the DSA in America. That's what we should copy. Look at the Linke in Germany. They're at 14-15% partially. That you should copy that. Look at let me pronounce it properly. France Insoumise, and I hope the comrades from French, thank you, come in on that. 17% in the polls, 500,000 members. That looks impressive on paper. But you have to look at, we have to look at it in more details. Their problems, France Insoumise is extremely undemocratic. It's centered around one person. It's all about the electoral structures, etc. It's not stable at all. This is not the kind of party that organizes us into a class, that organizes the working class to become a political force that can take on the state and can change things. The DSA in America, and we've had some interesting introductions there. It works for now because the Democrats don't have a membership in America. If you want to get involved in the kind of making a change there in those kind of politics, you join the DSA. It's very different in Britain. You can't just copy and paste that into Britain. You can just join the Labour Party as a real member. You can't do that in America. Or join the Greens if you're into that. So it's not just idiotic to try and recreate the DSA here because of very many problems. They get these people elected, and then there's no accountability mechanisms. So you're probably really injuring your brand, the DSA brand, with some of those people that are going to be elected and will probably attack the working class in their positions. So it's also impossible to try and copy them, I believe. The same, there's reasons why the Linke works in Germany, for example, which makes it very difficult to copy in Britain. It's from it's the old ruling party of the east of Germany. It had a serious mass base, it had serious amounts of money when it became the Link. It's gone through various stages, but it's had a lot of money and a lot of support already in the east of Germany. The electoral system is very different in Germany. It forces the left together to get into parliament. You need 5%. That has changed. That has forced people together into the Linke, and it's made it a real thing in Germany. Of course, we can learn something from both organizations in that they've had relatively healthy internal cultures. For example, they have political platforms, they allow factions to openly organize, those play a bigger role in the DSA. I think where small groups like the Marxist Unity group can make quite the splash and get elected onto the leadership, etc. But there's some positive things within that, but we just can't just copy and paste them into what's going on in Britain. I was going to mention the Trotskyists, the role of the Trotskyists in Britain. I think you touched on the transitional program. That's quite different. I think comrades in Britain, I'm not sure if they are all aware of that, but outside of Britain, Trotskyism plays a much smaller role on the left than it does in Britain. Britain, for historic reasons, was a safe haven for many political leaders and thinkers. So in the 20s and 30s, a lot of Trotskyist leaders fled to London, set up their groups here. Cannon and Schachtman were sent by Trotsky to unite all the various Trotskyist groups, etc. So Trotskyism in Britain plays a big role, I think, in these attempts to do one halfway house after the other, for the reason that Marcus explained, the transitional program, which I don't think we can really blame Trotsky on it so much. It is the sort of, as I think Mike's written about it, when, it's sort of, you can sort of explain why it was written in the 30s, a revolutionary situation where perhaps, if you're being generous, that kind of program might have produced you something. It didn't. But today, in a non-revolutionary situation, to say you cannot talk to the working class about the monarchy or democracy or, those big state issues, the army, police, you just have to talk about buses and a cost of living crisis campaign, because that's what the working class understands. They don't get the big issues. It's very dismissive attitude towards the working class. And it also has this idea that automatically it will, make people understand, oh, actually, we need socialism, don't we? It doesn't work, and it hasn't worked, and I don't think it does work. But it is, not so much Trotsky, but it's trying to, I think, still apply it today in this period is just bizarre, but it is a big thing in Britain still. Of course, you don't have to be a believer in the transitional program to have not much of a program, and you can mistrust the working class without being a follower of the transitional program. Jeremy Corbyn is no Trotskyist, he's Labourite. He believes you can introduce socialism through an act of parliament. Trotskyists don't make that mistake, they make other mistakes. But both find it quite easy, I think, to fight for a program that they know is inadequate to actually get to socialism, as out of an understanding that, or the belief that the working class doesn't get it. The 80%, 20% of, I was going to mention that, these are the crucial bits, isn't it? If we just agree on the 80%. The 20% is, how do we deal with the state? How do we deal with the army? How do we actually get to bloody socialism? What are the concrete steps, etc.? These are huge issues that we need to get our head around if we want to be serious and present a viable alternative. Both Labourites and, much of the Trotskyist left, if you want to characterize them on that, is they also agree on the fact that the differences of these 20%, we just brush them under the carpet. That we don't discuss them, we don't need to come to some kind of coherence, we just leave it as it is. And of course, with that goes the need for bureaucratic control. With it goes the need to stop people who want to challenge that, stop them from getting too much of a platform. Because, if you start being, if the inadequacy of your program is pointed out, that creates all sorts of problems. For example, the minimum program of most of these organizations contains all these sort of easy slogans, which they say is easy slogans. And if you look at it, they're not actually that easy at all. Tax the rich. We've discussed this. Actually, that sounds. Why not? Yes. It leaves the power structures and the capitalist system untouched. It could actually lead to capital flight. It actually could mean that your idea of financing socialism through taxes, is seriously undermined by all those big taxpayers going somewhere else. Similarly, nationalize the 200 biggest companies. That's in the revolutionary version, even without compensation. It's the same scenario. They might just bugger off somewhere else, or you just leave the middle class to the bourgeoisie. Really, that kind of program is just utterly inadequate. I think the new wave of partyism coming to an end now. This is something we should discuss as well, which is prevalent in Britain in particular. We are parties. We just don't want to do it with the CPGP. That kind of partyism, I think, has some very similar problems. Rather than clarifying differences, rather than clarifying difference of viewpoints and how to achieve political coherence, we're just keeping quiet about all those issues. We want unity and diversity, which sort of doesn't challenge people who want to send arms to Ukraine, for example, or to call on the state to send arms to Ukraine. We can all be in the same organization, pro-imperialist, anti-imperialist. The main thing is, we don't have the SWP in board because we were anti-sectarian sectarianism. It still requires a huge amount of bureaucracy, it requires speech controls over the things you actually disagree, etc. This is the same method, I believe, parties, and that's not based on the understanding that you need to fight openly, democratically, without speech controls, without, sectarianism and keeping those out, keeping this out. You're not allowed to say this, you're not allowed to say that. I think that doesn't build you a real party, it builds you another sect. It builds, they're claiming, oh, we're doing it differently from the SWP. No, you're not. You're doing actually exactly the same, but on a much smaller level and with much less coherence. You need to have some kind of coherence, you need to have a program that spells out what is necessary and needs to be achieved. There's a lack of understanding. I think that in some periods, people will not just flock to you. That in this period, trying to say we need to go directly to the class. We could be a party of thousands, tens of thousands in this period. Hopefully, it would be a good thing, but I think in this period, that is a very optimistic thing. So sometimes you also have to take stock, think things through, say what lessons can we learn out of the defeat of all of these projects? Do we really need to then build the next one that exactly on the same basis, or should we actually try and do something else? That doesn't mean we just plant a flag and wait for the millions to join us. We are very active in all of these halfway houses when they pop up. But we don't set them up, and I think that's a difference. I think from us communists, we do get involved in it, and if some others set it up, but we would argue against setting up something that we know is inadequate. We have to take our program seriously. We have to take the working class seriously, and have to say what we need to build, not just copy the DSA, the Link, France Insoumise, and indeed the undemocratic methods of your party, but actually build what is necessary. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, comrades. Both very interesting, both very succinct. I'm going to ask for contributions from the floor, please. Mike?
Yeah, okay. Thanks, comrades, for useful introductions. I had a number of sort of small issues. Marcus, sorry, a number of small issues. Marcus, and this is something which I've had. I was in the ISG, IMG, subsequently ISG, Mandela Art Organisation until 1993. And I know from the discussions which took place in there that the discussions which led to the creation of Scarborough Socialist Labour Party, the guys who became the Fourth International Supporters Caucus, were engaged in discussions with Scarborough, particularly through their RMT officials from late 1992. It's just that it took 4 years to arrive at the point where Scarborough was prepared to take the leap and jump. And of course, the same thing is true of Respect. The SWP was in discussions with Galloway about creating something like Respect 2 years before it was actually launched. And that delay almost certainly made the thing less effective than it would otherwise have been. Marcus attributes this to Pavlovism. Again, I think it goes back further than, on the one hand, it's a standard orthotrot thing to say that it's Pavlovism, but then the orthotrots all do the same thing. Look at Jerry Healy's relationships with Gaddafi. The American SWP and support for Castro you know, and silence about the suppression of the Cuban Trotskyists. So thinking of its Pavlovism is problematic. Where I think thinking comes from is there was a tendency within the pre-war proto-Fourth Internationalist movement which thought that Trotsky was too sectarian towards the People's Front. And the political representatives of this tendency were the POUM in Spain, well, not the whole of the POUM, but the Trotskyist wing of the POUM in Spain, the archaeo-Marxists in Greece, I forget what its name, ex-neighbour in the Netherlands, and Raymond Molinier and Pierre Frank in France. When the Fourth International was reconstructed in 1944-45, Pavlov from the came from the archaeo-Marxists. Mandel came from the Belgian organisation, the RSAPM. Can't remember what it was called anyhow. And Pierre Frank, who had been excluded from the Fourth International because of his positions on building, because this was the project, we built a broad front organisation. And then within the broad front organisation, we have a revolutionary organisation, La Commune, in the French Socialist Alliance. And there's a sense in which the other side of it, it's just a people's front. Actually, it's an unpopular front. Respect is like, it's more like, it's not like the big people's fronts in France and Spain. It's like the people's fronts which the Communist Party of Great Britain attempted to get with the Red Dean of Canterbury and this or that.
Duchess of somewhere.
Lady Astor.
Something like that.
I'm afraid Lady Astor will come in then, that's all right. It's Lady Astor, I can't remember. Lady Docker.
I think it was the Duchess of Argyll.
Or the Duchess of Argyll. Yeah. Anyhow, but it's the same stuff. The other thing, there's a slight gap between Spew walked and formed CAPU, and then the next step was no to EU, yes to democracy, which was Spew together with the Morning Star guys, together with some people from the far right, which then mutated into Tusk. But that, in a sense, why I think that there's a connection with the People's Front. We were talking about the People's Front actually in the last session. There is a strong connection between all this stuff. It's the clearest explanation is Georgy Dimitrov's speech to the Seventh Congress of Comintern. Is the United Front. The socialists say that we denounce. We don't denounce anybody except splitters. We will, when the communists criticise us, we'll only criticise splitters. It's an undertaking to shut up, to self-silence for the sake of unity. And all of these things, the object of the exercise is to self-silence for the sake of unity. I mean, it goes back, it goes back to the 1930s stuff, but in the Mandelites, it also goes back to, there was, the Mandel was concerned in building the left wing of the Belgian Socialist Party in the early 1960s. On the same basis, we build a broad class struggle organisation, and then we have a hidden Trotskyist organisation within it. Just the other thing, transitional programme and transitional method. I think the SWP still agrees with transitional method. They just don't agree with transitional programme. And transitional programme, when Thalheimer argued for it at Fourth Congress Comintern, is something much more concrete. It's a set of demands which, taken together, if you imply them, will create more communism. Because the sliding scale of wages, we index wages, but as long as the capitalist class controls the basket, shopping basket is the basis of the index. indexing wages just means that wages fall behind inflation. So you need to control the basket. But in effect, if you control the basket, you index wages, you've abolished money. Because you're actually receiving wages in the form of rations, which is what the contents of the shopping basket. It amounts to the abolition of money. And similarly, going along with that, sliding scale of hours, you work and you just divide up the work which needs to be done. That entails universal obligation to work. It's going to rationing work. You're moving immediately to ration, and then the nationalisation demands go along with that. This is a programme for, and Thalheimer is clear about this. He says, in order to defeat the bourgeois system, we have to actually go through terror. And in order to terrorise the bourgeoisie, we have to go through war communes, so that the link from the immediate class struggle to war communism is the right way to go. That's what that debate in 1922 is about. That's it.
Stan, then I take with them by fairly confident tonight.
Yeah, thank you.
No,
Where am I?
and look at the audience. Look at the audience. They will see you. Don't worry.
Yes.
They can see you.
Yes, good morning, comrades. I'm very simple stuff. First of all, anecdote. I mean, I remember being invited for the CPGB by Scargill's girlfriend. I can't remember her name. Remember that? I spent some time, a few hours in the YMCA next to the TUC, talking to her. I was being interviewed without knowing it for the meetings going on in the hotel at Euston, where Scargill had been 2 years before he was outed. So this was before he was outed. So he was finding out whether the Weekly Worker and CPGB at that time was suitable for his party. You know, they didn't invite us, so I must have spoiled the picture. Anyway, that was just a little anecdote for it. I was thinking, the openings were good, interesting, nice to review the situation as it was. And remember we studied in 1903 book on the RSDLP, Russian Social Democratic Labour Party, second Congress, overcoming the circle spirit with the party spirit, right? Centralism instead of diverse groups, in a sense comparable to our sects. These are local circles that don't last very long, but they're being unified in a party, isn't it? It's essentially the second Congress was actually effectively the first Congress, but that's in a situation of Tsarist oppression, isn't it? Very different to what we've got. I remember when the Soviet Union fell, we had this nice phrase that we're in a situation of a special period of reaction. Soviet Union fell as a period of reaction, which we're still in, really, of a special kind. It's one where they don't persecute you. In 1903 they were arresting people. The first Congress they had a little bit earlier, the leadership all got arrested. And they were constantly under that. When they drew out the rules, they're saying, well, we expect the elected leaders to be arrested. What do you do then? They have to be ready to replace people. We're not in that situation. We're in a situation where we have to make our arguments. And it made me think as well, with the Chartists, there was a mass working class party in Britain back in the 1820s and 30s and a bit more. And that was in circumstances of severe repression. Like people got, lots of trouble. They got jailed and all sorts. So that wasn't free, open discussion. We've got a situation, we can publish. We do publish. They don't come and arrest us for publishing. I know there's signs of it now. There's worrying signs of that. But, you know, you have to make the argument. And I'll just say half an argument doesn't win, right? When it comes to, well, made me think also of, which mentioned, you know, in Cuba, when Castro and his little military band that survived off the Grandma, you know, when they took out one of the local outposts, that's a military victory, and Batista had to withdraw all the similar police outposts, you know, armed police outposts. They had to withdraw all of them. So in military, you take out a weak point, you know. In ideological struggle, you have to take out a strong point. Right, you have to go to the main argument. If you're going to put forward stupid arguments about this, that, and the other, it doesn't work. It doesn't convince people. So we have to argue. That's why you have to have the maximum program. We're for communism, and we also have the program how to get there. You know, that's important. It's not nothing, but the main thing is to make the argument. You know, and if you go around pussyfooting around with, we're not going to tell you what it's really about, but just trying to provoke more struggle that will win more people to what, you know, to what, win them to not putting forward the full argument. We have to put forward the full argument. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacob. Just switch.
Yes. Oh, hello. Can you hear me?
And you will do it.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Yeah. So I guess it was just a quick point. I guess I'm not really in agreement with your ideas that taxing the rich is going to, you know, cause these massive problems. I mean, of course, capital flight is a possibility, but I think that I just don't think it's sensible to try and get people on board with demands like we should abolish the army and move to a people's militia, etc. But we're not even willing to concede like, well, we can raise taxes on the rich. Yes, we'll nationalize companies. Yes, I understand that obviously those aren't really sufficient to solve the problems, and there is probably going to be issues as a result of them. But I think that we can't just say to people like, well, no, your life's actually not going to get any better until we have communism. And then if they ask, well, when are we going to have communism? You know, if we're being honest, we'll probably say, well, maybe in a few decades, hopefully, if all things go well. I think that you can't win people's support by not addressing like cost of living issues. Obviously, I'm not saying we should just obsessively focus on, you know, the price of buses and stuff, but you know, for example, the bus fare cap is going to positively impact, you know, many people's lives. And I think it is a positive policy, you know, despite all the other damage that Burnham is bound to do. So I don't think we can just ignore people's concerns about cost of living and just say, well, you know, when communism comes, then hopefully things will be better. Maybe that's slightly unfair characterization of what you're saying, but I don't think we can be, you know, deficit hawks and say, oh, we can't tax the rich because they'll do this. Oh, we can't, you know, nationalize because they'll do that. Just say to people, well, maybe that will happen, but it'll still be better than the situation we have now. And it's part of the incremental progress to get to a revolution. Anyway, that's kind of what I would say. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. Jack.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Jacob. Well, of course, we have a minimum programme, and the last thing we do is turn around and say, well, the only solution is communism. The only solution is communism. We don't say that. We do say, though, that communism is something that we should seek to be talking about. How on earth, for example, can you seriously talk about overcoming, managing the climate crisis if you don't talk about communism? Does that mean that's all you say? No. You know, you should have measures of control over pollution. You should have measures of control over travel in terms of business travel, etc., etc., etc. So, yeah, that was I use the word silly, Jacob. You know, you ought to know better. I don't know you, but you ought to know better if you read the Weekly Worker, if you look at our draft programme. And of course, the fact of the matter is that the rich are taxed. You know, we do live in a society of where not only do we pay VAT, but if you actually take Marx's approach, okay, it's an abstraction, but the fact of the matter is labour power sells for a certain amount. And if they put the taxes up, the tendency, not saying it's a law, but the tendency is that the price, in terms of the money price of labour power goes up. Ultimately, governments run on the basis of taxing the revenue of the capitalist class, right? This is a capitalist society. Most of their revenue actually comes from taxation of the rich. So no one's talking about, don't tax the rich. What we're saying is that if you just have that slogan, right, then you disarm. One, because the rich do pay taxes, and the idea that the solution is, for example, for the NHS, all you need to do is raise taxation on companies. That is, how should I put it, too simplistic, it's delusional. What we actually want to be putting forward is the politics of expropriation. What we want to be putting forward is the politics of control over production. So yes, we don't have the view that all you need to do is up the taxation level of the rich, and then we're all better off and everything's fine. That is a delusion. That's what I would argue on that one. Okay, we are in a, how should I put it, we don't want to put ourselves into a false position of simply saying, I mean, although I did say it when we had the first panel, that it's clear that national conditions are extremely different. You know, if you look at America, no, America in terms of the DSA isn't applicable, in my opinion, to Britain. Why? Because the DSA is explainable, one, by its history, but two, by its relationship to the Democrat Party. You cannot look at the success of, you know, AOC just in isolation and just say it's the DSA. That's just daft. So trying to reproduce that in the same way, it is quite right. The idea that we could reproduce De Linke, the left party, which was the Socialist Unity Party, the ruling party in the GDR, that's, in my view, delusional. Why? Because there's no ex-ruling party in Britain, etc., etc. Nonetheless, if you look at our name, you know, Communist Party of Great Britain, that should give you a clue where we came from. And of course, you know, comrades have already referred to 1903, the Bolshevik faction, you know, 1919, the Congress of the Third International. People are copying the Bolsheviks. People are copying the Communist Party of Russia. Lenin does say at some point, I can't remember where, that some of the resolutions are too Russian, right? There is a slavish copying. Nonetheless, we are putting forward the idea that this sort of Bolshevik idea that is born in 1903 does provide something. That is relevant, I would argue, to all countries in the world. Right? So yes, Britain has its own specifics. I wore this T-shirt deliberately today, Labour Party Marxist. And you cannot ignore national specifics. Nonetheless, I do think there are universals. Okay, last point, really. I think that we really need to get to grips with the period of history that we're in. That if we look at what Stan was saying about 1903, it wasn't just that we were living, or they were living, excuse me, under Tsarism, or that was tough. Look at us now, we can freely publish. The fact of the matter is that if you look at social democracy, which the Bolsheviks were part of, the RSDLP was part of, this is a movement of the class, right? Not the coming together of a few sects in Russia. This is the movement of the working class on a global scale. I can't remember who the filmmaker was. I don't know if any German comrades know it. Is it the film 1900? Does anyone know that one? And there's
Italian.
It's not that film. Okay, anyway, I'm trying to think of the name of the film. Anyway, the film I saw was by a female German producer, or no, director. Anyway, it begins as a ball. It's 1900. Bernstein comes up to Rosa Luxemburg and says, "Can I dance with you, Rosa?" Rosa turns around and says, "I do not dance with people that I've been polemicizing with in the daytime." But the point I'm trying to get over about that isn't Rosa Luxemburg's attitude to Bernstein, but the fact that German social democracy thought that it was on the verge of power, and it thought that the French were on the threshold of power, and the Italians, and the British, and the Americans, and there was that confidence of the working class. Well, if you look at where we're at now, you cannot say that. We cannot say at the moment that the working class is moving. Can you actually talk about the working class? Well, you can as an exploited class. You can as a slave class. You can as an atomized class. If we look at the role of trade unions, if we look at the role of the Labour Party, the working class at the present time is disempowered. So the idea that we can sort of reproduce 1903, or that we can, how should I put it, with one leap form a party, I think is delusional. I think that the working class has gone through historic defeat with the collapse of social democracy. That was the concession, the collapse of official communism. And it's quite clear, as far as I'm concerned at least, that Trotskyism, although it thought it was invulnerable to all this, was actually part of that, right? You know, Trotskyism wasn't a separate brand. You had the illusion, you know, of people like Peter Taft talking about the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Red 1990s. Tony Cliff, you know, the Mandela Fourth International, they all had this idea that with official communism out the way, all they had to do was step forward. It didn't work. And I think that's because of an actual failure to understand the depth of defeat that we've suffered. So I just think, you know, I haven't got an easy answer. You know, if I did, we wouldn't be here in this hall with such tiny numbers. And if anyone has the answer, it's quite clear that no one else has the answer. What we can say, though, is when we look at left unity, when we look at your party, when we look at the SLP, when we look at we know that they're wrong. We know that they won't work. That's what we can say with certainty. What will work, I think, is much more. Maybe we have to wait and see. I don't think it's a subjective failure by us or Mug or the comrades in Australia. I think that it's objective circumstances that we're still in this period of reaction of a special type.
I'll take Steve Freeman, please, and then I'm going to take, unless anybody else wants to talk, before I do, Jacob from LinkedIn again wants to speak. So, Steve.
Okay, comrades, I think Marcus's contribution.
Stand there.
Stand about here. Is that all right there? Fantastic.
They can see you, don't worry, they've got a camera.
I think Marcus's contribution is very important because although he's talking about a period really from the mid-1990s right the way through to maybe 2008, I think that period is different. So I think we have to talk about before and after 2007-8. All right, and I think what's happened since 2007-8 is an exacerbation of what was happening before it. It's taken it on to another level. So I think the lessons that Marcus has, brings to us, I think it poses the question, what have we learned from that period, and does it apply? How do we apply the lessons that Marcus was talking about to learn about today, and how we deal with the question of your party? Because really that's what Tina's really talking about, And I don't think there's been a proper real discussion about your party, which I think should be discussed because of all the different factions and things that have gone in your party. I think Marcus posed it correctly when he said it's quite, well, he said, first of all, it's a question of the crisis of social democratic politics, meaning the Labour Party. I think crisis of the Labour Party, but I think it was, as he said, deeper than that. It was a crisis of our political system, our what we call the social monarchy, or as he mentioned, the Elizabethan welfare state. So the question was how, with that crisis, which is shaking the foundations of the Labour Party, even back then, before this financial crisis, how do we create a mass party to the left of the Labour Party, and not another small sect of hundreds of people, which wouldn't be a significant change? Can we create a new mass party? And Marcus reminded me of something I've forgotten, this formulation I used to use, and it's in Weekly Worker, the idea of the Communist Labour Party. And I haven't used that formula for a while, but it's important to say that the Communist Labour Party was not a programme, it was a description of the forces that could come together to create a mass party. Now, the problem back then was that most of the people who came to the Socialist Labour Party, to the Socialist Alliance, and to Respect, the majority of them were communists. The minority of them came from the Labour Party. So it'd be easy to say, well, if the majority of us are communists, well, ditch this Labour Party stuff, let's just call ourselves a communist party and not mess about with anything else. But I think what Corbyn should have told us was there is a mass idea of Labour politics. Corbyn showed that in a certain sense social democracy is not dead, because after 2008 he was able, out of the blue, because none of us expected it, to show there was an idea there should be a mass politics for the Labour Party. So the idea that you had a party in which the majority of people came from the Labour Party and there was a minority of communists, right, could be, how could we make that work? And the answer was we needed a Republican programme. Now you say, well, right, in that case, a Republican programme, the Communist Party, the CPGB, are probably the only ones on the left that probably have anything you might call a Republican programme. So I think it seems to me that is quite important. But I do remember in the days at the time of the SLP, I was on a working group that Scargill set up, and we were going to draft a Republican constitution for the UK. So we did this little working group, and we had this paper. And so when we came to the founding conference, everybody brought these working group papers to the founding conference to be discussed. The only thing was that the paper that we produced got lost and never turned up at the conference at all. So it just was sidelined. Because, of course, Scargill wasn't interested in anything you might call democratic or Republican politics. He wasn't a Democrat, he wasn't a Republican. So that was the problem. And Marcus again mentions the fact that the founding conference of Respect, he turned up to argue that the R in Respect should stand for republicanism, which again was rejected. And Galloway came up with the great idea that R in Respect should stand for respect, which was interesting idea. So the thing that seems to me that since 2008 and the financial crisis, we've gone into a completely new epoch, that the crisis of our welfare state, if you want to call it, our social monarchy, is now on steroids. It's just collapsing. Our democracy is collapsing. We are living through this period of a degeneration of our political system. And that's something we have to... The Republican programme makes more sense today than it did back then when we were trying to use it in the SLP or in the Respect or in the Socialist Alliance. But the thing, what we have to ask is, we need a transitional party. And it seems to me a Republican programme can do that. That's a minimum programme, and in that sense, it's a minimum requirement for mass politics. Now, what's the role of communists? Is it to lead the working class in the direction of a Republican Party, or is it to stand on the door as guards saying, well, saying to the working class, well, if you don't agree with communism, you shouldn't really join this party. Is that what we're trying to do? And now John's implied that's not what we're trying to do. I think you have to have, the communists have to come with a Republican program, not stop talking about communism, not making a case for communism, but they have to be the best Republicans in trying to create this mass party to the left of the Labour Party. So I think that's where we have to go. I think there are lessons to be learned from back then, Marx did, and I think that we have to apply those lessons to what Tina's talking about, which is why I'm still in your party, Tina. And I'm in a group called Republic YP, because we are trying to promote republicanism against the Corbyn's politics, which is essentially the same as Sky's, the same as Galloway's. It's a continuation of the thing we were trying to deal with back in 2000 and whenever it was, 2000 and whenever.
Jacob?
Yes. Hi, hello. Can you hear me? Hi, am I coming through? Hello? Oh, I can't hear anything now. Can you guys hear me?
Can you try again?
Oh, yeah. Hello, hi. Hear me? Hi.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Yes, so, I wanted to respond to Jack, obviously. So I do accept the point that the rich are taxed in the UK. It's not as if they have a 0% rate of tax. However, the rate of tax that they pay is nowhere near sufficient. Yes, the top 1% pays more than 1% of tax, of course, but it's nowhere near a progressive system. I mean, it's not even progressive by the standards of other capitalist economies in the first world. Britain is one of the countries where the poor pay the most tax. I've had a look at where the income of the government comes from, because obviously Jack said that, the government derives its income from taxing, the capitalists, but I would say that's in large part not true. So 28% of government income comes from income tax. Of course, that is progressive to some extent, but the higher rates kick in at a much lower rate than in other countries. And everyone earning over £12,000 a year has to pay income tax and national insurance, which is a very low amount. 18% of government income comes from national insurance, which is incredibly unprogressive as a tax because its rates are similar for the poorest and the very richest. And 17% of government income comes from VAT, which is again a direct tax on the consumption of the poorest. 8% of government income comes from largely council tax, which again is incredibly, regressive. The hated Thatcher tax, but and then 8% is from other taxes and dues, such as fuel duty, cigarette duty, etc. Only 4% of the government income is from capital gains, and 11% is from corporation taxes. So the vast majority of the government's income comes from taxing, individuals, and a large portion of that is from the very poorest. And I did have a look at the, the transitional program on the CPGB PCC website, as Jack, recommended. There's almost nothing on there about taxes. The only bit that I would say is meaningful is that there is a line that says that tax loopholes will be closed, but there's nothing saying to get rid of council tax, nothing saying get rid of VAT or national insurance. I mean, I've had a look at the Green Party platform for comparison, and their tax platform is much more progressive than what the CPGB PCC is proposing. And yes, I do understand again that taxation reform is not sufficient to establish communism or socialism, but I would say it's one part of a necessary step in a reformist program. I mean, unless we're planning to immediately abolish capitalism, which is not what it says in the CPGB program, then at the very least we should be demanding it to be more fair. I mean, as I say, even at least as fair as other advanced capitalist economies, which we're nowhere near as fair as. I think, Britain is one of the most regressive countries in terms of tax, on the planet. And, that's an issue which obviously most workers are going to be able to relate to. Even, right-wing workers probably want to pay less tax. And, all but the very most right-wing is sympathetic to the argument that rich people should be made to pay more tax. And I don't understand why we would give up such an easy, propaganda win in that respect. So yeah, that's all I want to say. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jacob. Tina, you wanted to say something before I bring in Mike then?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a bit of time to do another round, I think. Yeah, I was going to pick up Jacob on that. If it sounded like I'm saying, we shouldn't tax the rich and like maybe not, give them more money or something, that's definitely not what I meant. I just don't think it's an easy answer, and it's presented as being really easy. We all agree we should just tax the rich, and that sort of is it's one of the 5 political programs that your party has. I'm not even sure if it still has it. It was at the beginning. That was one of the 5, key pillars, is tax the rich, and that's an easy program, as well as nationalizing the 200 biggest companies or whatever, which I don't think was a part of the your party program, but it's sort of common standard on the left, isn't it? That's the way to socialism somehow. And I'm just saying that it's not. It's a totally different vision of socialism. Is if it comes through this idea that you have to just tax more, take the money away, take the businesses away from the capitalists, perhaps even nationalize everything, which was Sarah Sultana did that embarrassing interview once where she basically said every corner shop should be nationalized, etc. I think she wasn't thinking straight, I hope, when she was saying that. It's just, this sounds easy and sounds radical, but it isn't really when you look at it in more detail, was my only point. Of course, we should, have policies against tax havens. Of course, they should pay their fair share. And you might have a good point there. There should be a more detailed plan on taxes in our program. There should be more details perhaps on all sorts. And then you have a 1,000-page program. So, these are not easy answers, is what I'm trying to say. The left pretends that that's just everybody agrees on those. Well, no, not really. If you look into more detail, it becomes more complicated. Communism is not easy. Getting to communism, it's quite a complex, program. It's a complex. What do we mean by it? How do we get there? The minimum, the maximum program. It's not an easy answer, and that's what I was arguing against. That we shouldn't pretend it is, because it really isn't. And much of the left is just sort of trying to brush all of that away. We just focus on this and that, and we'll fool the working class into joining us because it's really easy. Socialism. We're all nice to each other, and it's all fair, and there's no climate catastrophe, etc. Well, no, it's hard. It's a hard job, and we need to take it seriously, and that includes fighting for republicanism. Yes. I would call it a communist program, Steve. Republicanism is part of our communist program. And I think you sort of usually argue that we shouldn't go that way. We should just focus on republicanism, which is the same method, I'm afraid, as what I think the SWP is doing in Respect, etc. They have other halfway houses, but yours is also a halfway house. You don't think, I suspect you think you're a communist, but you don't think talking to the working class about communism is getting a hearing. So you're trying to do a sort of, a little trick. You call it, for you, it's the republicanism. For the SWP, it's, tax the rich and all of that. These are just little tricks. I think that the problem is that they don't really work. So we're not deficit hawks, etc. So we have something in our program on nationalization. We want to nationalize energy companies. Of course, they should be under democratic control, etc. But they're not the answer. This is not a replacement for socialism. In terms of your party, yeah, of course we're still in it. I'm sort of still in it. But, the problem is it's buggered, isn't it? It is on its way out. It's been ruined by Corbyn, who's managed to destroy 2 good opportunities, not for a communist party. I mean, we were arguing to transform your party into a communist party, but there were 2 opportunities for the working class to actually get organized and to cohere, etc. A pond for communists to swim in, etc. And he's managed to mess up two big opportunities. We stay in until we're expelled, for sure. The problem is there, I think, is the opposition in your party, the main opposition, grassroots left, is copying many of the problems of the leadership of your party. Lack of democracy, a lack of transparency, enforcing this non-disclosure agreement without having signed it. The members shouldn't know about what's going on at the top. It all needs to have, confidentiality, etc. Well, it builds you a sect. It builds you a slightly bigger sect than the SWP. It's still a sect with the bureaucracy in charge and not the members. And if you have, that kind of method in the opposition, I think you've given up. We had a sort of chance, an opportunity to do something. We've messed it up. It's been messed up again in the Socialist Federation. That's now gone as well. It's imploded. So there's one, it's always with increasing speed in this period anyway, these organizations implode because they keep repeating the same method on a smaller and smaller level rather than actually, try out that revolutionary idea to actually fight for what you believe in, and rather than a sort of halfway house. And yes, I did have it in my opening. I forgot, yes, we do copy the Bolsheviks. You want to copy the Bolsheviks? Who copied the Social Democratic Party of Germany as well? It took inspiration from it. Didn't copy AP, 1 to 3 or whatever you call it. But it, they did take inspiration from the Social Democratic Party of Germany, which was a mass working class party, organizing the working class on a revolutionary program. You can do it. You can take inspiration. And I've been arguing that we should take inspiration from them rather than from sort of halfway houses that look successful at the moment internationally, like the DSA, Die Linke, etc. But we wouldn't be able to replicate here, even if we want it. And we don't want it. We think we need something more. And I think the answer to the question was Margarete von Trotter. Is that what you're looking for? Yes. Okay.
She did a film on the Biden.
I think she did that one on Rosa Luxemburg, is the famous one.
We watched two.
Okay.
Finished?
Yeah, finished, sorry.
Mike? And then I'm taking Marcus.
We need to re-switch again. Hold
Okay, this is addressed to Jacob's contribution, and it's also addressed to Steve Freeman's contribution for basically the same reason. The UK imports 46% of the food that is consumed in this country. 46%, just less than half. It is an enormous annual deficit in trade in visible goods. And indeed, in relation to the visible goods that we do export, an enormous proportion of them depend on imports. So, for example, the cars which are exported from the UK, the engines for the BMWs which are produced in Oxford come from, engines and gearboxes are manufactured in Germany and imported into the UK. Oxford is merely what used to be called a maquiladora, an assembly plant without the guts of the car contained in it. A substantial proportion of the building materials used in the UK is imported. The government has just saved by nationalisation continued production of steel at Scunthorpe, but in reality, there's nothing like the amount of steel which is needed for ordinary operations, etc. So this country is heavily dependent on imports. The Thatcher administration shut down most of British, a large part of British industry on the basis that we would live by financial services, that Britain would become another Switzerland. It turns out in reality that Britain doesn't. We do live, we get an enormous amount of income from financial services and from legal services. So, for example, the British Virgin Islands has the largest foreign direct investment from China of any country in the world. There isn't masses of factories in the British Virgin Islands. The British Virgin Islands also has the largest foreign direct investment to China in the world. And the reality is that this is tax dodging by Chinese billionaires, which is organised by law firms and accountancy firms operating out of the City of London. And the guys in the City of London are paid very high salaries, and those very high salaries are not, it's easy enough for the ultra-rich to dodge taxes, but the guys who are being paid between 100 and 200 £300,000 for legal and accountancy work for the purposes of the UK skimming tax dodging transactions worldwide. London is the world's biggest tax haven. If we say abolish tax havens, what we're actually saying is abolish the financial income of the City of London, the bulk of the financial income of the City of London. And then after that, there's still a deficit. There's still a large deficit. How is that deficit covered? That deficit is covered by inducing people to park money in London. Because people are from overseas to park money in London on the basis that it's a low tax and low regulation regime. So if we raise, the point is if we raise the taxes instantly, that deficit, which is covered by borrowing from the ultra-rich, goes away. So we need to understand where the UK is. The UK is a former world hegemon power, a former major imperialist power, which is now in a situation analogous to the Netherlands or in the 1780s, or to Venice and Genoa in the 1780s, which is places which had been world hegemonic, had become financial centres, and were no longer capable of sustaining independent sovereignty. The UK is not capable. The UK is in the process of going bankrupt. It's surviving partly also by selling off capital assets. So why not make the water companies pay? The answer is because nobody except asset strippers was willing to actually buy the UK water industry because it's not profitable enough to attract serious investors. And the same is true of the railways, and the same is true, and so on and so on and so on. So then, that implies two things. The first is it's not a solution. It's not proposing a realistic solution to say tax the rich. The second is it's not proposing a realistic solution to say republic within England. Still less republic within England and Scotland, separate republic in Scotland. It's not a realistic solution because the UK is not going to survive for another 50 years as a sovereign state. It's going down, and the solutions which we need to propose need to be solutions which we propose on a European scale. What we can do in the interim is we support trade union struggles. We support the construction of cooperatives. We support tenant struggles and so on and so forth. But we recognise that we are not going to solve the economic problems of the UK on the level of the UK. We can only do so on a European scale. The historic programme of the left on tax, just very briefly, Marx and Engels in the Communist Manifesto essentially propose nationalisation of the land and the state funds itself by charging rent to everybody. It's not nationalisation, doesn't mean nationalisation of the land in the sense of all the small farms and so on and so forth. It means the landlord interest, which in the UK was utterly dominant. You know? The SPD, it was abolish all indirect taxation. So it would be abolish VAT and raise rates, raise council tax, maintain direct taxation on incomes and on property. So rather than abolish council tax, it would be raise council tax. That's it.
Thank you, Mike. Marcus.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, there's a lot there. I mean, I think when we're raising the question of party and program, of course, we can go all over the place, and I suppose we have a little bit. I'll just go through a few things. I forgot to mention, of course, that I met Tina in the SLP. at the Brixton South London branch or something. That was where she met the CPGB, and I didn't put her completely off, which was good. Firstly, on Mike, I am not an expert in Trotskyism, obscurantism, so yes, Pavlovism is my punk understanding of, and I accept, yes, it's basically just all Trotskyism. And I think it comes from Trotsky suddenly realising how bloody isolated he was. This is a man who just led, just stormed the heavens, led a revolution, and, was now being hunted and eventually was murdered. And he's suddenly isolated with a small band, and oh my God, how do I get back into mass politics? Oh, join the Communist parties. No, join the Socialist parties. No. So, and I think all of Trotskyism has still got that kind of disease, unfortunately, that, and yeah, so I think that's there. I'm not opposed to doing effective mass propaganda around taxation or how wealthy people are. Yeah, we can make hay that way to point out the mass inequality that capitalism brings. But with Jacob, if our propaganda is linked to a solution that just by taxing the rich, we can fully fund the NHS, I think it actually disarms us. It disarms the working class completely. Outside the Labor Party in Australia the national conference, I spoke at a rally that was called Social Spending, Not War Spending. And I challenged the premise of the rally. And I said, well, no, you're presenting the idea that the problem with the way we are ruled is if we just change the taxation and spending priorities, we'd live in a world that was okay in that sense. Also, a cost of living crisis. I mean, I said this to some Cliffites in Australia. We're not in a cost of living crisis. They were like, what? You can't say that. Of course, I said, no, this is capitalism, and capitalism is about driving down the wages of the working class and our income. Calling it a cost of living crisis, again, I think implies that if we just had the right people making the right policy, we could just tweak things and we wouldn't be in a cost of living crisis anymore. And I think that is, and I think, Jacob, the way you framed it, you said incremental process till we get to a revolution. This is exactly the problem I was trying to point out, that our demands to our program premised that way is seen as irrelevant to today's material conditions. And I think Steve also suffers from that problem in the sense that we don't tell people, we don't put our maximum program in the program. We hide that. We just trap them with republicanism. It's better than taxing them. At least it's politics. I'll give Steve that. But it's still hiding what our maximum program. You can win people based on our maximum program as much as you could win people on saving school funding. I mean, we don't have to have one shot. And I mean, interestingly, the SWP flip-flops, again, which I was trying to make in my opening, if they recruit people, they go on a demonstration, often they don't chant tax the rich. They might one day, and then the next time they'll say, one solution revolution, one solution revolution. I mean, bonkers, these in that sense. I mean, it's not in there is some reference to tax in the CPGB draft program. In our little draft for Labor Tribune, we call for a steeply progressive taxation system. I mean, I think that tax ultimately is a tax on capital. I did look it up while you're speaking as well. And I've heard rich people argue against this, say, we pay loads of tax. And, and in Britain, the top 1% pay 33% of all tax. That sounds pretty generous, doesn't it, to the person on the doorstep? And there we go. I agree that this is not about subjective failure. It's about the objective nature of capitalism as well, what Beck was saying. And that is why we have a minimum and a maximum program. We don't just go and knock on the door and say, by the way, we want to just have communism, and what we fight for in the here and now is irrelevant. That is not our program. We do have a minimum program that is relevant to today's politics. And I would say that the minimum program of most Trotskyists involved in all these halfway houses is they adopt the Green Party's politics or left Labor politics. Oh, that'll do, as long as we get people active and angry, and then the revolution will happen one day. Also with Steve, I think you're trading on asking this idea, this working class nostalgia, and I see Dave Osler often makes the same tweet. He says, "Oh, the 70s, you know, oh my God, the left wants to take us back to the 70s," and he will tweet or put on social media, "Yeah, that was terrible. There was great punk music. There was social housing. You could live on the dole. NHS was funded. You know, everyone was in a union. Oh, how terrible!" But this sort of nostalgia for the past is not a program for the future, and trapping Labor consciousness workers in I wish we had what we had before. I mean, I think this is what reform is doing. This is what reform is trying to do. Oh, it was much better back in the olden days when there weren't so many migrants. And I wish we had that, and this fantasy of the past. And I think that's wrong. Tina, yes, our program is getting to communism is difficult, but I was reminded of Brecht's poem In Praise of Communism. It is actually the simplest thing that's hard to achieve. You're not an exploiter. Anyone can understand it. I mean, John Lennon, you know, wrote a song that was very popular, which was about communism. And people do understand it. It is not difficult to explain to people, but most people will say, "Oh, it'll never work. What about human nature? All this stuff." But I think people understand what communism is, what socialism is. It is the getting there that is difficult. Finally, so I think people mix up the audience with this. When we are saying we want a communist party, we're not doing on a mass door knock through Hackney. We're gonna knock on everyone's door in Hackney at 6 o'clock. We're going to get all down there and say, "What we want is a mass communist party. Are you in?" I go, "Fuck off. You know, I'm watching the football," or something like that. Our audience is the Marxist left at the moment and the advanced layers of the working class, the vanguard. And we're saying to them, what we want is a communist party. And they're all running away from it. Steve, and you remind me, the trauma that Sarah was talking about, the trauma of being in the SLP, and all these memories are coming up. Steve's greatest problem was, oh my God, Marxists are a majority in this party. That's terrible. We desperately need to be in a minority. And it's like, no, if we've got Marxists in a majority, let's form a Marxist party and then fight on a coherent program to turn that into mass politics. And the idea that we can't do that because our program is irrelevant to mass politics means you've got the wrong program.
Thank you, Marcus. We're running short of time a bit now. Jack, and then Tam.
Yeah, I was going to also reply to Jacob. Jacob, I don't know you. I don't know where you're coming from, so I'm not going to try to say, well, this is the problem with what you're saying, because I just don't know. But I would just say that, I mean, we do stand for the abolition of VAT. We do stand, from my memory of the draft programme, we hope to have some delivery of it soon in the week. I'm sure I can look it up, and we stand for progressive taxation. So that's my memory of it, and I'm sure I'm right. The problem is that from the point of view of collective capital, if you've got unemployed people or people whose income is at X level, what you have is social problems, and therefore what you have is social programs to subsidise people. You've got the bottom end of the working class. You might notice, I don't know where you live, Jacob, you know, if you take this road here, Euston Road, I noticed over the last couple of years, what you've got is a tent, not saying city, right, but you've got homeless people. My guess is that the majority of them are migrants, right? But if you came here, or if you came to London 100 years ago, 150 years ago, you would have found mass poverty, you would have found mass destitution. And the question is, from the point of view of capitalism, or capital, collective capital, is that something that they would be prepared to tolerate at the moment? Or would they face a social explosion? Either way, my argument is that if you take wages, wages can be subsidised in the form of housing benefit, in the form of paying for schools, paying for the NHS. This is something in the last analysis, and I do stress in the last analysis, that has to come from capital, right? So yes, they tax the working class, but ultimately what we're dealing with is a tax on capital. That's my argument. So in terms of an agitational slogan, I'm not going to reject tax the rich, fair enough. The question is that the answer to the crisis of the NHS? Is it the answer to the housing crisis in Britain? Is there one simple solution? That's our argument about it, and precisely if the working class is in a position to impose that, what we need to be going for isn't taxing the rich, is expropriating the rich. That's our argument. So I'm sure the Green Party has got a much more, how should I put it, detailed programme when it comes to taxation. That is not the role of the minimum maximum programme of a Communist Party. The minimum maximum role, the role of the minimum maximum programme of a Communist Party is to map out the broad outlines of transforming the working class from an oppressed class into the ruling class on a global scale. That's what it's designed to do. It is not about what we do this year or next year in terms of detail. That precisely, as Tina was saying, you'll end up with 5 volumes, and that won't be enough. In terms of what Steve says, okay, we want a Republican Party. Okay, so we're a Republican Party. We're not a party, but you get the point. We're Republicans. I mean, you can't say that our front page is an affectation. It's part of our normal approach to politics. But throughout this week, Roxy was reminding us, or telling us actually, that with the comrades in the Spartacist League, who, by the way, actually supported Arthur Scargill's purge, it's just worth your while knowing, in the SLP. You were saying that, I think that in the Mexico meeting of the International Spartacist League, the question of the climate crisis was mentioned once. I mean, that's what you were saying. Steve, here we are. I mean, it's lovely and cool in this room, but we're going through our 3rd heat wave in Britain. This isn't going to be the new norm. It's going to get worse and worse and more severe in terms of flooding, in terms of rising sea levels, in terms of forest fires, etc. What's the answer in terms of the republic to this? Is it a socialist republic? Is it, I mean, what class? What class rules? What's that?
Do you want me to heckle you?
Yes, of course I do.
Well, in that case, I'd say that there's no national solution.
I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you. So that is... Oh, sorry.
It's going to be a global solution, but we've got to do something about it in this country. And
I agree.
We've got to change the power struggles in this country. If we don't do that, then we can't change the situation here.
We agree. And therefore, isn't it amazing that apparently in the 21st century, we cannot replicate what the German working class was doing in the 19th century and what the Russian working class did in the 20th century. Tina's quite right that if you take the inspiration for the Bolsheviks, the RSDLP, it was Germany. And in Germany, what you had with the Erfurt program is a classic minimum maximum program. This is a program for communism, but it's also a program of turning the working class into a class, organising the working class into a class. Why in Germany in the 19th century can millions of people get it, right, vote for it, join it, and millions of people can be mobilized in Russia and in Spain and Portugal and France and Italy, or maybe I've said Italy already, but you get the point. Why is the class now incapable of doing that? We had a session, first session, and I'm going to finish with this, from our comrade in America, where on Fox News, they are repeating the program, right, of not the Marxist Unity Group, but the successful resolution moved and motivated by the Marxist Unity Group and adopted by the DSA. And if you read that program, and that's what Trump is doing, and that's what Fox News is saying, they are saying this is communism. This is communism. And this is something that they're saying, something like, is it 30% of the American population when they're polled they want? Now, what they mean by communism, I'm not going to go there. Nonetheless, if the American masses can start to get it, why can't the British masses, why can't the Dutch masses, the German masses in the 21st century? We're vastly better educated, we can get organised, so I don't see that what we need to do is limit ourselves to the minimum programme. I think that the minimum programme only makes sense in the light of what we're actually aiming for, which is precisely global communism, and as Mike said, our main strategic starting point for that has to be Europe. That is something that is graspable, is doable, not now, but in the relatively near future. So I think communism is a burning necessity. I don't mean that as a pun, by the way.
Sam, we're running very short of time, so can you be as concise as possible?
Pardon?
We're running very short of time, so can you be as concise as possible? Yeah? Go.
Well, you keep stopping me. Yeah, I mean, Steve, you're saying no national solutions to these problems, the climate of that, but you supported the national solutions in Scotland. You supported the Scottish splitting off from YP that caused half the disintegration. Of course, the bureaucracy under Corbyn, but also that unilateral move by the Scottish nationalists within your party has been a major part of the problem. And you supported that. Well, it was, and then also you turned up on the first day at the your party conference and saying it should almost be boycotted. You weren't for the conference, but I think it is above all that you lump everything into this idea of republicanism, as if that is the be all and end all and the answer to everything, and you support an English national party as well. But I did think it was really interesting what you're saying about 2007, 2008, because I think it was a seismic change that hadn't been looked at, and that perhaps the Corbyn and your party is a sort of consequence of post 2007 to 2008. And all of these other ones, the SLP and Socialist Alliance and Left Unity, that I've thought that it's been getting put across as if they're all the same. Your party is basically the same, but they're not. Those were almost sect-like in that way, in comparison with the idea, and not just idea, the practicality of Corbyn, Labour Party, and your party. And certainly with the Labour Party, it was what drew me back to CPGB, was the recognition that wasn't going on with the rest of the left. I don't know what your position was, but of recognising how important it was to get in that Labour Party and fight to, yes, you want to call it Communist Labour Party, but Labour Party Marxists and so on, and taking up that fight and against the witch hunt that didn't happen from the rest of the Marxist left by and large. They carried on pretending the Labour Party was finished as a vehicle for class struggle, and they've been happy in a way that that period is now over. But it's that respect sort of then, I just looked up, they sort of crossed over that they had their peak. I just read, it was a Wikipedia post. Respect had its peak in 2007. That was when they had the first MP, and 2007 was when the schism happened with the SWP. That was when they split, and they carried on, meandered on up until 2016. And that is interesting. You would have thought, given you sort of think that everything was, you know, a sort of upsurge in class struggle caused by 2007, 2008, that Respect would have benefited from that, but they didn't. And there hasn't been benefits because of what happened before, what Jack outlined in terms of this period that we're going through. 2007, 2008 and onward is still part of that, but it is taking sort of different forms now. And a big part of that that's going on is what Mike has been saying, that in terms of Britain going bankrupt. And it occurred to me that I've not really picked up this, that Brexit is a sign of that. They couldn't sell off. I don't know if this is a kid, but it would have seemed to me that Britain wouldn't have been able to sell off the family jewels and so on in quite the same way if Brexit hadn't happened. That was a sort of strategic move in a way that a means to sell off assets to particularly the States. And we're seeing it now, that the money that is getting pumped into oh God, what's her name? She was the Home Secretary, and then now she's
Liz Truss.
No. Yvette Cooper. I mean, the amount of money that is getting pumped into her in order to sell off the NHS, and that NHS, not thinking in a way of sort of romanticising and fucking clapping on our doorsteps, but the NHS is an example of the political economy of the working class that people can understand. That is a not-for-profit, and that doesn't necessarily mean nostalgia for the past, Marcus, I don't think, but I think punt and pushing, and it is part of a programme in that sense as well, that the likes of the NHS and council housing, that they are elements of the political economy of the working class that we have lost because of this special period that we're now in.
Thank you. Okay. Steve, if you want to say something, I've been reliably informed that our panelists here aren't going to say anything. Yeah.
Well, depends on.
Okay, all right.
Give me 2 minutes now.
I was a little bit shocked to hear. I was a little bit shocked to hear the overthrow of the communist minimum programme by Mike and Tina, who basically seemed to me to say that a democratic secular republic was a kind of trick that I was trying to put on the working class. Well, if it is a trick I'm trying to put on the working class, is this same trick being put on the working class by the Communist Party's minimum programme? So, in other words, are you serious about your minimum programme? Are you fighting for it? The problem we have is that most of the left, the vast majority of the left in this country, don't accept Republican democratic ideas as valid. So we are fighting against the left in general. And I'm sure that when you've tried to work with, as you have done recently with Nick Rax and various other people, you would have hit this problem pretty soon. And it was predictable, to be honest. So we haven't won that argument except amongst the people in this room and a few other people. And that's despite a very good article in the Weekly Worker this week, for example. But that you wouldn't get that kind of article, I would say, more or less anywhere on the left. But the problem is You know, it's not a trick to embarrass the SWP. We come up with republicanism, we can hit the SWP with it because they can't cope with it. So it's just we're having a trick on them. That's not what it's about. Really, the argument is that it's in the DNA of our system of political economy in this country that we have to confront that, whether we want to or not, which is why Engels and Lenin both argued over 100 years ago that that Britain, to call it, would become a federal republic. They made a prediction.
Britain and Ireland.
Britain and Ireland would become, but they mentioned quite specifically in the small sections, in the small nations that made it. They weren't just talking about Ireland, they were talking about Scotland and Wales, I would argue. So that was the argument. And why could they make that argument? Because they had analysed how capitalism was evolving, how it was working. It's not an ideological thing. It's in the actual way in which capitalism works and how the constitution works in this country. Not least, and Mike's analysed this as well, the politics works from the glorious revolution of 1688 to 1707, which put the bankers in charge of this country, and that's carried on right to this day. So if you want to talk about taxing and spending, then you are talking about HMRT, His Majesty's Treasury, HMT, His Majesty's Treasury, and HMRC, His Majesty's Revenue and Customs. So when we're talking about taxes with the rest of the left, do we think these institutions of the Crown are something that we can take control of and start taxing the rich with these institutions? No, we cannot. The utopianism is not the idea that we might like to tax the rich or they should be taxed more fairly or we could have a more progressive taxation. It's the institutions and constitution of this country that would never allow that to happen. And that's the unrealism of those arguments. So I'm going to stop there, yes, okay. I'll make one last point, John, which is, I think, it's one of those points that this last very short point. I think the problem of what the Russians and the Germans were doing at the end of the 19th century, we're living not after the Russian Revolution, but in a way after the defeat of the Russian Revolution. So we're dealing with a situation where Labourism and communism is seen to be Stalinism. So it doesn't appeal to the working class. It's being used by Trump, of course, to accuse anybody like the Democrats as being communist because he just thinks that will get him votes. But, you know, it's inherent in the situation.
You want to record?
What did you want to do?
Oh, go on, then.
Okay, thanks, comrades. What I want to say there at the end is it is about returning to program. I mean, Steve, always the bridesmaid, never the bride. I mean, when I first came here 30 years ago, he was on the brink of joining the CPGB. Don't think he's on the brink anymore, but and I would say to Jacob, I did look through the CPGB's draft program. It doesn't really have proper formulations around VAT and progressive tax. So maybe Jacob could join and move a motion and an aggregate about that to just to update the program. And what I would say is until, and I know there's some reaction to the phrase partyist, but until the pro-party spirit people can come together to start to argue for a Republican minimum program, for a communist maximum program, we can't take that fight to the rest of the left. And these sort of birth and deaths of dead Labourism will keep happening again and again because the working class does need a political party. It has it to some extent in the Labor Party, and that is partly why trying to recreate Labourism outside the Labor Party again and again and again, you know, it will collapse, and because people will go back. I mean, Andy Burnham apparently is very progressive now because he's making buses free. I mean, great. And that is an element of Labourism. But trying to create that at a smaller scale outside the Labor Party we should not be doing it. If it happens, we should be engaging with it and so on. One of the great things, I mean, I'm in the Labor Party. It does turn you in Australia. I think it probably does make you a little bit more right-wing, but it also gives you a taste for mass politics. You are meeting and dealing with people constantly who don't think in small circles. They think, who's going to win government? Are we going to win government?
How many thousands of people can we do this? What mass door knocking can we do? And we need to be able to do that on the communist program, not recreating it on left labourism or greenism on steroids. And I think that's what we can learn from these failures. They're laboratories for lessons we need to learn for the future.
Yeah. Marx and Engels wrote about the fight for a republic because they said that's the form the worker state would take, and it would be a republic. I don't think they said that, that's that's the end point, the republic, or having a republic is sort of, the next point is communism. That's not on the agenda, for example, in America, France, Israel, etc. So republicanism, yes, is part of our program, but it's not it. It's not the end point. And we have to be clear about that. The end point is, for us, is communism. It is the universal liberation of humanity, the self-liberation of the working class to liberate all of humanity. And yes, communism has been tainted by Stalinism, quite right. But should that be the reason to say, oh, well, let's not talk about it. Let's fool the working class into it by just talking anything but communism? No, we have to reclaim it. We have to explain. Communism is actually extreme democracy. It's the liberation of humanity. It's not the hellhole of what Stalinism was and what the Soviet Union was. It's universal human liberation. We've had it before with primitive communism. It's not an impossibility. We should, look back as well to look forward, not for copying it, but we have to explain the natural state of humanity is actually communistic. We're not supposed to kill each other over, scarce resources, etc. We are we were a race, people are, working together, etc. With a species that should work together and not be dominated, etc. So, we can reclaim communism for the democratic content of it, and we just have to explain it. Doesn't mean we have to shy away from it.
Thank you, comrades. See you all at 6 o'clock for and a couple of comrades with him. See you at 6 o'clock.